good day, or should I say good day from Australia, as we are in front of the virtual image of a 125-year-old vine that I took a picture of in the Barossa Valley in Australia from the Langmill winery about 15 years ago. So if it's still there and it's still productive, as you can see these grapes, it's about 140 years old. Today I'm going to talk to you about vine structure, and without further ado, let me get to my slides. So we're going to speak about general structure first of plants. In this case, of an annual dicot flowering plant. There are other kinds of plants besides flowering plants, such as gymnosperms, which are the pine trees, or ferns, primitive plants such as mosses. Today we'll talk just about annual flowering plants, dicots. There are monocots, which are grasses, because grapevine is a dicot flowering plant. So plants are made up first of cells, individual cells and different cell types. And those cell types form tissues. Those tissues are composed of different cell types. Examples of this would be the epidermis or the skin of the plant, which can be multiple layers of different cell types. We could have vascular tissue. Vascular tissue would be the piping system in the plant. So the xylem is one form of tissue which forms the water pipes that send water throughout the plant. And the phloem is another piping system adjacent to the xylem, which transports sugar. Then we have tissues forming into organs or functional units in the plant. And we can divide this into systems. So we have over here a shoot system and a root system. And the shoot system is composed of different organs. Root systems could be as well. You could have rhizomes or tubers, but generally speaking, we have a taproot and lateral root. So we have roots, we have buds as organs, we have leaves, flowers, and within those flowers are individual organs, such as the carpel or the anther. And then we have fruits, which are formed from those flowers. Okay, a few grapevine facts here to put us in perspective here. So not only is grapevine a flowering plant, but it's not an annual plant, it's a perennial plant. Oh, and I need to go back, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention the different parts here. So as an introduction, we will also have leaves that are made up of a blade, this part here, and a petiole. We have apical buds, which in this case really would be called the apical meristem, from which new growth is occurring. And you would have apical meristems at the root tips, which would allow those roots to grow. So they grow, a dicot grows from its tip. You have nodes from which the leaves are coming from, with an axillary bud in this axis of this petiole forming with the stem of the plant. And then we have a section in between called the internode. So back to the grapevine facts for a moment. So plants many of them are annual plants, but many of them are perennial plants. And as we indicated earlier, we can have 125-year-old or even 150-year-old vines, so they can live for a long time. And therefore, considerations about those plants are a little bit different. In addition, grapevines are highly heterozygous. Now, what do I mean by that? That's a genetic term to indicate that it's not homozygous. That means, homozygous means that you have two alleles of the same gene that are exactly the same. So heterozygosity means that they have varying alleles. And this is important because we can't propagate grapevines from seed very easily, because if we crossed Cabernet Sauvignon with another Cabernet Sauvignon, the pollen from one to the stigma of another to make a new plant or new seeds, they would not be Cabernet Sauvignon anymore because of the high heterozygosity. So effectively, grapevines are very, very wild. They've not been developed like our vegetable crops or grain crops have been and bred over years and years and years. Because of this, an important aspect of this is that we then vegetatively propagate our grapevines. So we reproduce our Cabernet Sauvignon by cloning it in a sense. We are taking a cutting off of that plant, it's genetically identical, and propagating it over and over again to get more material. Now, eventually genetic mutations occur in those plants, and so we can get different clones or different plants, or even a different genotype, such as where we had Pinot Noir, now we have Pinot Blanc or Pinot Gris, which are mutations from Pinot Noir. In other cases, we have breeding where accidental breeding has occurred, where, for example, Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon are crosses between known other genotypes that spontaneously occurred in the field. And then a farmer or a grower discovered that. Okay, enough of the grapevine facts. Let's talk about the cycle of vine growth. So we already have a propagated vine in the ground. And in the spring, we are going to get a plant coming out of dormancy when the temperatures warm up to 50 degrees or above on average during the day. We're going to get bud break. And so this is just an image of that. We move then into a period of time of rapid shoot growth. And eventually we get flowers visibly forming, although they pre-formed the year before. But we now are seeing them bloom. And once they pollinate, we get berry set. I'll come back in another lecture to talk more about flower and fruit development. The canopy continues to grow, and at some stage about halfway through the summer season or ripening season, we get what is the beginning of the ripening period, known as berry softening, or veraison is the common term, which it refers to color change. And you can see an image here of some of the berries. So the cluster here is not uniformly changing color all at the same time. Each berry is slightly different, and it's part of a composite flower that forms this cluster. Then we start to get, as we head into fall towards harvest time and full ripening, full maturity, the vines start to anticipate the fall, and they start to harden their canes. So the shoots turn into canes. We'll get into the vine structure here in a moment, the next slide. Then after fruit harvest, we have a period of time of either good weather or maybe a frost that causes leaf fall to eventually happen, and the vines go into dormancy. Sometime during this period of dormancy, in our case, in our area, we wait until bud break to do pruning because that helps to delay bud break and protect us against frost. Okay, what's going on with the growth of the vine at this time? So first of all, there's a couple of fundamental things that are happening. That vine has a trunk, and in that trunk is a large amount of storage of material in that trunk that is starch, and that's energy that's being fed to the plant until it can become photosynthetically active. And then as those leaves start to form, they start to become photosynthetically active. And the sugars that are being made from photosynthesis are then being transported to other parts of the plant. In physiology, we know we have a term for this called from source to sink. So sugars move from the source, the leaves, under a pressure gradient to go to growing parts of tissues or storage tissues or organs that require sugar. And it's driven by how strong the strength of the sink is. So as we'll see, there'll be competition, particularly for berries. Berries will be the strongest sink. But in the beginning, when we have bud break, so here we have shoot elongation rate. On this axis here, we have changes in the trunk radius, and then the rate of berry growth, and actively growing root tip. So we have an increase in activity going in this direction. And as we start out on days after bud break here, we see that bud break is the first thing to happen, and it continues to grow very rapidly. And we head into a period of time where the flowers are forming. The shoots have started to form before that. There's a peak about 20 days after bud break, and then shoot growth begins to decline. At the same time, flowers, in this case, this is roots that are forming. So the roots are growing faster now after the shoots start to decline. So we're getting root growth underground. At the same time, the trunk is starting to gain in girth as well. So these things are all growing at the same time. At this period of time, we have anthesis. Anthesis is the time when flowering is occurring. And so fruit set is about to happen. And during this time, then we see competition for the sugar. And so all these things start to decline in competition to the berries, which are starting to form right here. And we have 3 phases of berry growth. So we have this rapid enlargement of berries occurring, and then it comes down to almost no growth at all. This is called the lag phase. And this is the point where we start to get into veraison again, where the berries start to increase very rapidly in size. And then as they mature, they decline. So we have veraison right here, and then we have harvest out here. And you'll notice that the roots are going up at this phase, going down at this phase. But then as we go into the fall and everything else is declining, berries, trunk are all slowly growing now, we see a rapid flush of root growth going on here. So this is in preparation again for the winter. So the roots and the trunk are important storage spaces for starch, for energy that have been accumulated over the season. Okay, so let's talk parts for a moment. So we have a trunk of a vine here with a large root system with both surface roots that come out during the season and probably die back later on. And we have feeder roots that are going much deeper. These surface roots provide a lot of water absorption and absorption of minerals. Off of that trunk, depending on how the vine is pruned, we have an arm or a cordon. And off of that, we would have a shoot coming off of some sort of fruiting cane or a spur. So there's a cane system versus a spur system. We'll talk more about that when we talk about trellis design. And these have been pruned, obviously. This is what the shoot will look like during the season. We have a leaf with an internode, a node, a fruit cluster or two, some lateral shoots that can come off out of the axis of the leaf, and tendrils. We'll come back to this in a moment on the right here. And then on the spur, we're going to have buds which will break into some sort of shoot during the season after pruning in the spring. Okay, and this particular image, there are 4 buds, and then there's a showing of a basal bud which could break off of an old base bud off of an old spur or shoot earlier. And I'll show you a better picture of this in a moment. So let's look to the right here. We have a leaf blade, a leaf petiole, and we have in the axis these lateral shoots that are growing. Just opposite this leaf blade at the bottom of a shoot, we also have our clusters, and typically it's 2. This is genetically variable, but typically it's 2, and they form just opposite the axis here of a leaf, okay? As we go up the vine further, instead of fruit clusters, we get tendrils coming off the axis. So in fact, this cluster is actually a modified tendril, and you can manipulate this with gibberellic acid to form a fruit cluster. But normally that's a physiological trick, and there are a couple of variations of that, but this is the normal for a natural vine. Okay, and then we have a growing tip up here at the top, and we also have lateral buds that are forming here. So with this vine, this picture here, I'd like to show you what an actual base bud is, because this is a point of a lot of confusion for people who are doing pruning, especially for the first time. The base bud is at the base. It is a latent bud, and it normally remains dormant. Sometimes it can break, but it will not be fruitful. What you want to do when you're pruning is to count the buds based on the first bud here and the second bud, and not this base bud. So we often prune to just 2 buds. Sometimes we do 4, it depends on the pruning system, but you don't count this base bud. So with that, I'll end this video and talk to you later.